Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss how, although I said early on I would be more than happy for family farms to be exempt from inheritance tax and would actually prefer it if Rachel Reeves works the policy differently to miss genuine farmers out but hit the fake investment farmers much harder. But I have to say, the longer the farming campaign goes on, the less inclined I am to actually support it. I still believe the policy I'd prefer, and the policy I'd prefer, ironically, is one that the genuine farmers would be happy with. But it's like farming groups are actively running a campaign to cost the support of Labour voters in favour of those who don't really have any sway over the government in place right now. I mean, you tell me how that makes sense. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, talking about this today because another so-called farmer wound me up. I saw a comment from this farmer who was doing a little clip on, I think it's Talk TV. And it seems like it was designed to act against his own interests. Now, to be clear, this farmer was dressed in expensive clothing. That's a bit of a feature of the farmers that they push in front of the cameras, right? If there are any sub-minimum wage farmers out there, this was not one of them. In fact, I don't know that there's any evidence that this guy was a farmer at all. They were in central London at 8 a.m. this morning. Now, it's possible, but it's also possible he was a city lawyer and he bought land as a tax dodge for his children, for all I know. But let's break down what the issues are again and how farming groups have proceeded to persuade the public of their cause. So the major issue which farmers have in terms of vaguely valid concerns is that many farms have high valuations. Now, for a start, the valuations of farmland is often inflated. Why? Because it's such a good tax dodge. So ironically, it's the wealthy investors buying land, calling it a farm, that is raising the valuation of that land, right? So they should see those people as problems, not like comrades in arms. But anyway, the problem is these farms have these high valuations, but they generate very low returns. In other words, farmers are stunningly bad at managing money because given the value of their holdings, if they sold them and put the cash into even a low-risk investment fund, they would be living very comfortably for the rest of their lives. The argument is they do not make enough off the land to possibly pay the inheritance tax, even though it's at half the normal rate, has a way higher than normal level of tax relief, so you don't even pay it on the first few million, and can be paid over 10 years interest free as well. I mean, how bad at finances do you have to be to think that this is the way to live life? But never mind that. The argument is that the family farmer, having inherited the farm from their last remaining parent, presumably, could not possibly pay the tax. Literally impossible. The money just isn't there. So they would be forced to sell. The prospect of doing so and having a very nice income from the investment return doesn't actually appeal to them. They'd rather act as slaves and work the land for less than the minimum wage, which somehow we're led to believe lets them maintain a large farmhouse. Now, I personally think tax should be lowered or increased according to what is good or bad use of money and wealth for the country, right? Farms, very good, useful, produce food, vital. We already import too much food, and the land when sold will not necessarily be bought by someone who will use it to continue farming. So I would actually urge Rachel Reeves to implement one of the many suggestions to facilitate this. I think the one that a lot of experts congregated on was to charge inheritance tax at a high. Some people were actually saying something like 30%. No. 40%. 40% is the normal inheritance tax rate, right? Above the tax relief rate. So Rachel Reeves should have charged 40% inheritance tax, but the tax is only levied when the land is sold. That way, if you genuinely are passing on a family farm, there will be zero inheritance tax. The problem with the current system is that genuine family farmers are being hit, and I am willing to accept some may be cash poor, even though I have to say, I've lived in semi-rural areas for a lot of my life, and the farmers around where I've been living have been very obviously doing nicely. but you know, my own experience is obviously severely limited. But my other beef, no pun intended, is that those who buy land, who then install 2 goats and a bucket and call it a farm, so that their children can inherit the land and then immediately sell it and then pay no tax, they're still getting a really good deal out of this because they're paying 20% instead of 40%. So it's still a good tax dodge, which means although those people are griping because they'd rather pay nothing, they're still going to be encouraged to buy land as a good way of getting out of some inheritance tax. So I'm all in favour of a policy that lets family farms stay family farms and tax dodgers get their tax bill at the full amount. Haven't changed my mind on that. But of all the list of things I would like the government to do differently, this one is dropping down the list because of the way farming groups have framed their arguments. They're actively putting me off. It's like they're so Tory that they can only think in Tory terms. The polling I've seen shows that they do generally have public support for their position. But in strategic terms, you know, and I've said this about polls on many issues, like overall public opinion, like what does it matter? It doesn't matter anything. What matters are those key voters that different political parties care about. So in this case, we talk about Labour. Who are Labour's key voters and what did they think about it? You know, if you can't persuade them, and it doesn't make sense to try and persuade, you know, people who don't vote Labour. It makes sense to persuade Labour voters of their cause, particularly the ones who voted Labour last year, but that aren't guaranteed to next year, or next time rather. You know, all Labour need to do to win the next election, they just have to satisfy the people that voted for them last year that they're doing what they wanted them to do. Yes, of course, they'd like to persuade others as well. After all, there will be some people who will be dissatisfied. But the people who vote for Tory arguments and then didn't vote Labour at the last election, they're not Labour's targets at the next election. And let me just set out what the farmers' arguments look like to a left-wing Labour supporter. Just let me explain it through my eyes, right? Because we're the ones who matter. We're the ones whose votes and continued support are important to Labour. People like me, not those who still voted Tory last year after everything they did, not the ones who voted Reform UK, or even Lib Dem. Labour aren't chasing after those votes. So, feature 1 is that they are standing shoulder to shoulder with the obviously fake farmers. The ones who are using land as a tax dodge and ironically raising those valuations of farmland. You know, the ones who bought the land as a tax dodge. There have been several spokespeople for the campaign featured in the mainstream media, not just Jeremy Clarkson, who have been found to be people who actually made their money in the city and bought land as a tax fiddle. That is why when I see this farmer on this thing this morning, I'm thinking to myself, well, it might be a farmer, but it might not be, because there are so many cases where the media have interviewed someone who it turns out is not actually a farmer, right? The reason there should be reform of inheritance tax on land, you shouldn't just leave it as it is now, it should be reformed of some sort, is because there's a lot of money hiding from HMRC with the present system. The public wants more investment in public services, and they know that this requires people to pay their share of taxes. Now, for those of us who are not swayed by the Tory client media, we're not swayed by some posh Herbert on Talk TV, right? It looks very bad to run a campaign on the basis of allowing very rich people to use land as a way of dodging tax so that the rest of us either have to pick up the slack or suffer worse public services. Second feature is that almost everyone that the media have bothered to interview, as I've said, whether cosplaying investor or genuine farmer, is very obviously doing all right for money. Posh togs, brand new cars. If there are any farmers out there who genuinely struggle to make ends meet, I'd like to know how many exactly. Because let's be clear, despite the argument that, you know, about how many actual farms will be hit by this inheritance tax, there is some disagreement with that. There are lots of family farms, genuine farms, who are making enough money to afford it. You can't tell me that it's a pure coincidence that I've lived in 3 different semi-rural areas and it just so happens I've lived in like the only 3 where all of the farmers are comfortably off at least, you know, brand new cars, nice togs, plenty of wealth on display. I can believe there are some struggling farmers, right? Particularly with small holdings. I cannot believe that they make up anything close to a significant number without some cold, hard, independently verified facts, which have not been forthcoming. Third feature, we are expected to think it's fine for the farmers to pay their adult children below the minimum wage by dangling the carrot of farm ownership. Decades later, they'll already be old themselves when their parents retire or die. This is like open all hours, if for real. It's abuse. Now, if farming groups think that the way they're conducting their campaign is fine, if they think it's fine to argue for wealthy people to be able to use land as a top tax dodge for their kids, if they support slave wages for their own children, and they think it's appropriate to try to persuade us that they're completely broke, but keep shoving people in expensive clothes in front of the camera to represent them, well, that's fine. If it works, it works. Great. Well done. But if it doesn't work, let's just say it doesn't work. If it turns out that these tactics, which may, with the support of a misinforming media who want to undermine Labour at every turn, if it actually works to get like broad public support, but only work on those who are susceptible to those tactics, which mostly means those who don't vote Labour anyway. And let's say it just turns out that it, for some reason, doesn't actually persuade a Labour government to change their mind, and that Labour government is in place long enough to see this policy properly bedded in the long term, they will only have themselves to blame. There was a different way to present their campaign, one that would have chimed with many more Labour supporters without really alienating much of the public. They opted for the lines which appeal to dyed-in-the-wool Tories, probably because most of them are. They should accept the consequences of that. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's their own fault because they had a choice. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.